Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined tonight by two excellent guests. Firstly by Siobhan Tolland of Imagine Scotland and Unchained Media, and who's also standing for Equalities Convener of the SNP's NEC. Siobhan, how are you doing this evening?
Not too bad, how are you?
I'm very well, and thank you very much for joining us. And on the other side, we have Roger Mullen, former SNP MP and now Director of Momentous Change. Roger, how are you doing today?
I'm very good and looking forward to our wee chat about the presidential elections later.
Excellent. Well, we will get to that very shortly, but first we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. So as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,003,492 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 936,481 were confirmed negative, 67,011 were positive. There were 999 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly 28 new reported deaths. This will, of course, be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested when they should. We do urge you, as always, if you are showing symptoms of a new, dry, persistent cough, a temperature, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, then do please book a test as quickly as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 1,254 people in hospital last night, 92 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,877. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. And sadly, at the moment, we don't have any details on figures for the UK as a whole, as there has been a problem with the collection of the English case numbers. But we do also have the weekly report from the Office for National Statistics regarding deaths in England and Wales in the week ending 23rd of October, which was week 43 of the year. In that week, there were 913 COVID-related deaths registered in England and 65 in Wales. This is an increase from the previous week of 46% for England and 38% for Wales. The total for England and Wales in this ONS report is 20 fewer than were previously reported for the same week in UK government daily statistics. As in previous weeks, the number of deaths in care homes and private homes are still above the 5-year average. However, for the first time since week 20 of the year, in week 43, the number of deaths in hospitals was also above the average. The difference was only 14, though, compared to 614 back in week 20. And before we go on with the rest of tonight's headlines, if you would like to join the conversation here at Scotland at 7, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. And as you can see on the screen now, we will be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen throughout the show. But in our top story tonight, the Tories have U-turned on their decision to end the suspension of the minimum income floor within universal credit after pressure from the SNP and organisations across the UK. The SNP, including the party's Shadow Work and Pension Secretary and Shadow Business Secretary, urged the UK government to extend the suspension of the MIF beyond the 13th of November to allow self-employed individuals to continue receiving universal credit based on their actual earnings, which has been a lifeline for many since being introduced in March. The SNP's Work and Pension spokesperson, Neil Gray MP, has welcomed the U-turn, but has said this is just the tip of the iceberg of what needs to be done to protect jobs and livelihoods during the coronavirus crisis, and called on the Tories to immediately do 3 things. Firstly, make the universal credit uplift permanent and extend it to legacy benefits. Secondly, confirm clearly that Scotland will receive furlough support outside of English lockdowns. And finally, bring in a financial support packages for the 3 million people who are still excluded from available coronavirus support. So we are going to talk a bit more about the furlough scheme in a minute, Siobhan, but this issue of universal credit for people who are self-employed, this is something that was, as we said, was introduced earlier in the year and is now about to be withdrawn. What do you make of this, and why do you think the UK Treasury is so keen to take away all of this financial support that was actually quite popular early in the year, and leave people in dire straits going into the winter?
um, there's maybe two ways of looking at this, isn't there? I mean, Dominic Cummings is a big fan of chaos theory. We could argue that this is kind of part of the chaos that they maybe kind of thrive on, really. But probably more realistically, I think that the economic system that the UK seem to be pursuing is basically save big business at all costs. And there's a wee bit element here, I think, where in times of crisis, you cut off the arms to save the body type of structure is in that. If your priority is to save big business, then anything else goes aside. So the smaller businesses, the kind of the ordinary people tend to kind of get thrown away by the wayside. I mean, this is why most of Scotland now want to remove themselves from the UK, isn't it? Is that the economy is the wrong way around. It's not working for people. It's not working for the well-being of people. We are effectively working for the economy, so we get sacrificed for the larger economic structures. I think that's what's happening, actually. I think that I genuinely don't think they see anything wrong with that, because if your raison d'etre is to save the monopoly economy and big business, then you would sacrifice everything in order to save that. And I think that's probably what we're seeing here. I think there's a concern. There's a concern in terms of how they're going to fund the kind of the debt that they're running up, etc., etc. They work on a structure where they always want to be in surplus and that kind of economic structure. But I think what it comes down to is a genuine lack of concern.
Now, Roger, this is another example of the UK government swearing up and down that policy has been set and it's not going to change, and then at the last minute making a change. Now, a lot of those last minute changes have been for the better, which is something that I suppose that we have to welcome. But what do you think is going on in Whitehall that these can be such firm decisions one day, and then a couple of days later things can be flipped on their head and it's presented as, isn't this wonderfully generous from the UK government?
Yeah, well, you ask a very good question there, Kenny. As somebody who spent some time engaging with the Treasury when I was a Treasury spokesperson going in, I think there is this view that somehow things are extremely well organised, very rational, and things are thought out well in advance, and that's how policy from the Treasury is prosecuted and undertaken. But when you're on the ground, you find it's not quite as clear as that there are contending internal political pressures. There's obviously pressures from ministers, but there's pressures externally as well. And the other thing is that in the Treasury, people don't agree. They don't agree in what the basic fundamental economic approach to society should be at a time of crisis. And therefore, you're always going to get contending voices. And sometimes one voice rather higher than another voice. So what I would expect is going to happen is that what we might call, and Siobhan has called this element of chaos, I expect this chaos to continue, not because they believe in chaos, but because there are all these conflicting pressures and they don't have a coherent view of the economy.
Well, still on economic issues, the Tory government has come under further pressure over full furlough payments at 80% being made available to Scotland whenever it's requested by the Scottish Government, after yet another Tory minister refused to give a clear answer and rode back on an earlier commitment made by Boris Johnson. Despite being asked directly in Westminster today by the SNP's Alison Thewlis if the Treasury will ensure that it will make full furlough support of 80% available to any part of the UK that requires it after the 2nd of December, Treasury Minister Stephen Barclay dodged the question entirely. It follows a failure from the Prime Minister's own spokesperson to confirm Johnson's earlier pledge of full furlough support for devolved governments when requested, instead only talking vaguely of economic support. Meanwhile, Tory Cabinet Minister Robert Jenrick also refused to give the same commitment as the Prime Minister, stating that it is a decision that the Chancellor will have to make in the future. So Siobhan, coming to you on this one as well. Again, this issue of the furlough scheme has been a constant kind of refrain from the SNP for months. Is we need this to have this available in Scotland when it's needed in Scotland, and a lot of prevarication from the UK government. We finally thought we had a definitive answer from Boris Johnson yesterday, and by this morning it all seems to be unravelling again. What do you think is going on?
Lord, it's it's like trying to grab onto jelly, isn't it? Every time you think you've got a hold of it, and then suddenly kind of Johnson slips away. You know what? This is not a big ask. It really isn't. I mean, most European countries are doing this as standard practice, for goodness sake. Germany and France, they're moving into 2021 in terms of the furlough scheme. They recognise that it needs a long-term, safe and stable structure in order for the society to survive a global pandemic. This is not small stuff here that we're talking about. It's not a big ask for a devolved government to have flexibility as to when furlough can be employed for the well-being and security of a society. These are not big asks, and it's just you know what? Just when you think that that Westminster can't sink any lower, or that the Conservative government can't sink any lower, then they do something like this, and then you think this is just absolutely shocking behaviour, really, chaotic at its extreme. And it goes back to, I suppose, what Roger was saying earlier on. It's all these conflicting, nobody really knows what they're doing. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. It's just this constant knee-jerk reaction. But something dawned on me last night. How much less stressful would it be for Scotland if we didn't have to negotiate with Westminster every minute for some form of economic security here? How much better it would be for Scotland's well-being if we didn't have to sit and wait. Has he made his mind up? Oh, he has made his mind up. Oh no, wait a minute, hold on, he's no. Oh, hold on, he is. Hold on, he's no. Oh, we might not make a decision now, then we might just leave it till later. That's not a way to treat people. It's not a way to treat a devolved government. It's not a way to treat a country either. No wonder the polls are moving towards independence. Every time Boris Johnson gets on the telly, something else just drives people in Scotland thinking, oh God, is this what we have to deal with now? Furlough is not a big ask. It's really not. It's a standard response in Europe. This is not something that we should be going cap in hand for.
And Roger, looking at this, we did hear the Prime Minister yesterday in Parliament say that yes, it would be available wherever it was needed. But we know that Boris Johnson often says more than his prayers. Do you think that is the policy that will eventually shake out? Or do you think that this backtracking we've seen from Robert Jenrick and others today is an attempt to kind of undo what Boris Johnson may have said inadvertently?
No, what I think is happening here is that they don't have a coherent view of future policy. If I pick up on the point, for example, that Siobhan rightly made, if you look at Germany, they've said, here is our policy direction in relation to furlough for... Now, what's going to happen there is what could happen here. You set a policy direction that gives stability for everybody. You know the direction of travel. However, if suddenly the pandemic begins to go away faster than people thought, if things get better, you can always rather easily roll back the policy interventions that you no longer need. But rather than taking that coherent, longer view of policy, we don't have any forward-looking policy from Westminster. And that's why it seems as if you're working from hand to mouth, day to day. And when you're working day to day without any coherent policy framework for the future, of course you're going to end up getting ministers caught out in television because they don't know what's happening either.
And with what you do know of how these things work in Whitehall, what do you think is going on there? Because surely, at least at cabinet level, everybody should know what the line is. Why are the communications of government policy become so chaotic, do you think, during the pandemic?
Well, I only have a very simple explanation for this, and it's this. They're not very good at what they're trying to do. They're actually not particularly competent. And when you add people who are not particularly competent, I mean, this was a bizarrely put together cabinet with people round pegs and square holes and all the rest of it. So when you're hit by circumstances that call for long-term policy thinking and coherence, and what you've got is a mixture of people there for other political reasons, not for good governance reasons, this is what you end up with.
And Siobhan, to come back to you, one of the other things we've heard about the furlough scheme is obviously this issue of people who are on minimum wage, where 80% of the furlough amount is obviously then less than minimum wage, less than what it's considered reasonable for people to live on. Do you expect to see any shift on that, either from the UK government or potentially the Scottish government trying to offer some sort of top-up to people? Do you expect to see anything like that in the coming weeks?
Well, I'd have a lot more faith in the Scottish government, maybe topping up than I would the UK. It's hard to say, I think, because I think that if we look at the evidence of Conservative austerity agenda over the last 10 years, then we have seen quite a clear process of not really caring about the low paid, and actually driving that poverty deeper and deeper into society. So, I don't have much faith in the UK doing it. But you know what? Things like furlough and stuff, I would have never expected a kind of, UK Westminster government off this ilk to have done that. So it's one of those things I really don't know. I really couldn't do it either way. I hope they do. Do you know what? I hope they do for the sake of everybody. I really hope they do. But I think that as often happens, it's probably going to come down to the Scottish government to mitigate that.
And Roger, kind of similar note, when the story there we mentioned these 3 million people who have fallen through the gaps in various ways, often people who are kind of contract workers and things like that, who have received no support so far. Do you expect to see anything done to help those groups out?
If there was something going to be done of a substantial scale, I believe it would have happened long before now. I mean, this is a real economic catastrophe, not just in the waiting as it was, but now it's facing us. A lot of these people, these self-employed and the people in contract workers, are the people who give the economy a lot of the flexibility. They include quite a lot of the innovators, the fresh thinkers, the things that you need to drive a modern economy forward. And they're being forced out of that kind of lifestyle. They're being forced to look for different ways in which they can get some kind of income for their families. And so that it's a desperately difficult situation. Given the numbers and given the attitude of the Westminster government, I am not optimistic that they're going to address this particularly meaningfully. And I think it's unreasonable to expect that any of the devolved governments, whether Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, are going to have the means of plugging the holes that are being left, because they don't have the powers, they don't have the financial levers to do so. So whatever the devolved administrations are going to try and do, I can't see it being sufficient. We need Westminster to move. We need them to move quickly, but I'm not optimistic.
Well, we move on now, and an expert group that includes police, fire, and animal welfare representatives has called for the introduction of no fireworks zones and tighter restrictions on the purchase and use of fireworks. The Independent Firework Review Group has submitted its final report to ministers, urging a fundamental shift in the way fireworks are bought and used. The call comes following widespread public support across Scotland to reduce the negative impact of fireworks. The group, chaired by former Chief Fire Officer Alistair Hay, has recommended a number of measures to be taken forward, including the introduction of mandatory conditions when fireworks are purchased from retailers, restricting the times of day fireworks can be sold and volume of fireworks that can be purchased at any one time, restricting the days and times fireworks can be set off, the introduction of no firework areas or zones, and the creation of a proxy purchasing offence to prevent adults from buying fireworks on behalf of those under the age of 18. So, Siobhan, I'll come to you first on this. I mean, I'm a huge fireworks fan, but clearly there are some pretty negative effects, especially when people who maybe aren't that responsible get a hold of powerful fireworks. What do you make of this review by the Scottish Government, and are these restrictions ones that you'd like to see introduced?
Yeah, probably. I mean, if there's consensus for it, then yeah. And I can see where the issues be. I like fireworks as well. I find doing them myself kind of a bit tedious, but I like going to the kind of big public displays and stuff. I'll probably miss that this year. But yeah, I can see there's scope for certain zones where you might want to. From a personal perspective, fireworks going off at all times of the day and night can be incredibly annoying. I think that there's certain kind of people, students with people with ASD, for instance, might find that quite disturbing, the changes, the noises, and so forth. So it does have an impact on people, and of course there's the pet issue as well. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it, that there'll probably be a little bit of resistance to, but in a couple of years' time we'll wonder what the fuss was. But people deserve a wee bit of safety, maybe, and maybe more so even now, because we've been through quite a lot over the last few years. There's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of kind of a wee bit of trauma with COVID and stuff as well. Maybe it's time to just kind of calm things down a wee bit and make it feel a little bit safer for people. And if we can do that a wee bit with fireworks, why not?
Mm-hmm. Roger, one of the things that jumped out at me about this is that there isn't currently an offence about buying fireworks for under 18-year-olds. I mean, that does seem like a fairly obvious loophole that ought to be closed, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I've not read the full detail of this, but my understanding is that the big displays like Edinburgh Castle at Hogmanay and things like that are not going to be affected. Those types of events will still be able to take place. But I think you put your finger on the key problem, Kenny, in your opening question or statement, and that is, today there are a lot of very powerful types of fireworks. When I was a youngster, you actually couldn't get really powerful fireworks. You were buying sparklers, you were buying bangers and things like that. You maybe had very simple little rockets, but there was nothing like what is possible for people to purchase today. And I think that's where the danger lies. I mean, we all want to give people as much freedom as possible, but they can't be given that freedom to exercise where they're putting other people at severe risk. So from what I have seen, I think I would be supportive of these suggestions.
Yeah, and we do urge you, obviously, if you are doing wee firework displays at home this week, then you do take as much care as you possibly can, please. But we move on now to, I know, that story that Roger was looking forward to earlier. Early reports from the United States suggest a mostly calm election day, with reports of short lines at voting locations following a record-breaking wave of early and postal voting. However, shops and other businesses have been boarding up their windows in many major cities, as business owners fear that almost any result that emerges tonight could lead to trouble in the streets. The coronavirus pandemic has prompted many voters to vote early or by post, but this has mostly been by Democrats supporting former Vice President Joe Biden. Republican President Donald Trump has repeatedly tried to undermine faith in postal voting, meaning more of his supporters are likely to vote in person today. One major potential problem is that when counting begins tonight, those on-the-day votes may appear to show a strong performance for Trump, but that lead will be wiped out by a much larger pool of Biden votes amongst the other votes to be counted later. This so-called red mirage could be seen by Trump's supporters as proof of the president's conspiracy theory that he's winning really, but that postal voting is being used to steal the election from him. Many observers expect that whatever happens, this will not be a normal election night. Neither candidate is likely to concede defeat, and much may yet be decided in the Supreme Court, not at the ballot box itself. So, Roger, I'll come to you first. As we said, you're quite a fan of US politics. You do follow these elections very closely. Does this red mirage idea, is that something that you're particularly concerned about?
I think it's possibly already some signs of it happening to this extent. You're absolutely right in what you say about the postal voting and the early voting. It looks as if all the intelligence is suggesting that that is favouring the Democrats to some degree. But it's interesting, the early reports from the likes of Florida and the like in terms of today's voting that's taking place suggests that the Republican vote is coming out very strongly early in polling day. So you're getting this kind of unusual differential effect depending upon the voting method that is used. Now, how that is going to play out right across all of the states of the US is a complete unknown at the moment. But of course, people will be concentrating in those relatively few states, your Floridas, your Pennsylvanias, your Wisconsins and the like, the ones that are going to have to, or at least some of them are going to have to shift from Trump to give Biden the presidency. It's very difficult to judge these things. I mean, I think most people expect that Biden will win the overall vote by a significant margin, some millions. But of course, the key thing is you're going to pick up enough electoral college votes, and that's less certain. Although, if you believe the polls that are coming out, my hunch is that it's looking like Biden is going to do that, which means that if he doesn't, I'll never be invited back in this program.
No, Roger, we don't penalize anybody for making bad predictions. Particularly in the last few years, it's become very difficult for anyone to make clear predictions about what's going to happen next. As you say, there are a number of these swing states in play, and as you say, Biden does have a lead in some of them. There is actually potential for a kind of sea change in American politics, though, in Texas. I mean, there's been a long time shift from what was a very heavily Republican state, which is now much, much closer. And some people are suggesting that this might be the year when Texas turns blue. Is that something that you think is likely to happen or even possible at this stage?
I wouldn't say it was likely to happen, but I would say it's a possibility, particularly if some of the groups in Texas turn out to vote in greater numbers than in previous elections. I mean, this is going to affect not just Texas, but I think in Texas, if you are going to see the possibility of a switch towards the Democrats actually happening, it's going to mean that groups in society, whether it's those of color or those of gender or whatever, who traditionally have voted less intensely, if they come out, then I think that's what's going to drive the possibility of a change. And the signs are that voting across the board is going to be higher, right across the board. But that's going to affect all the parties. More Democrats are going to come out and vote than before, but so are more Republicans, all the information is. So again, it's down to this thing that we're only too familiar with in Scottish politics, and that is, what's the differential turnout going to be? That's very difficult to predict at the moment.
Now, as you say, this is a very big election. We've already seen the biggest ever early voting. A third of the electorate has already voted. It does look like this could be the biggest turnout election in US history. What's your feeling about why that has happened? Is it partly that early voting and postal voting has been encouraged and made easier, so people have thought about it more, or do you think it is very much a thing about Trump where people are very, very motivated either to support him or to oppose him?
I think it's both those things, Kenny. I think the pandemic has meant that people have had to organise their voting strategies much earlier than before. And all the parties have had to think about how are we going to encourage people to vote early. We're going to have to do exactly the same in terms of the Scottish Parliament elections, I would think, next May. We're going to have to try and get more people registered for postal voting. And that is going to, if that can be accomplished, will tend to generate a higher turnout, basically because they come from home than going to the trouble of going to a polling station. So I think there's that organization. But I also think you're absolutely right about Trump. The division in American politics, I've never known a division and contrast between Republican and Democratic leadership as great as it is at the moment. And I've been watching and an interested viewer of US politics since the 60s. This is undoubtedly the most divisive election. Now, where you get these tensions arising, these kinds of divisions, then what also can happen is it has a mobilizing effect on both sides. Because they intensely dislike the other side, so they're determined that they're going to have their say. So I think both the organizational aspects you hinted at, but also the divisiveness caused by Trump are the key factors in driving up turnout.
Now, Siobhan, I want to turn to you on this. Don't want to leave you out of the discussion. Have you been following the US election closely, and how are you feeling about what might happen?
I'm a wee bit head in the sand on this one, if I'm absolutely honest. The minute Donald Trump got in last time, I thought that's him in for 8 years, you know. So I'm a natural optimist, but with Trump, I kind of keep thinking he's going to get in again. You know, he's going to get in again, and probably what Roger says that we'll maybe have Biden having the popular vote, but you know, maybe
Mm,
across the states it will. He might just swing it. It, it I I watch it as if I would watch a kind of dystopian horror movie. You know, it really feels like that sometimes, and it can become incredibly depressing. I have a friend that lives in Louisiana, and you know, she tells me some awful horror stories about what's actually going on, and she's a historian as well, and so you know, she talks a lot about you know just the what Trump galvanized when he got in
mm,
4 years ago, that basically the racists, the misogynists, they came out in the open. And that's what seems to have kind of happened across the country, that you know violence is up, and you know civilian armies, and you know it's just that kind of the attitudes, and the kind of the divisiveness, and do you know what, the hate
mm,
actually that was maybe kind of bubbling under the surface a wee bit has just come out complete in the open. It's a very, very difficult time. I wouldn't want to be in America at this moment in time. I wouldn't want to have to make the decision, because I watched the Biden Trump debate, and I was utterly depressed watching it. It was like watching two kids, you know. And I just thought the degeneration of political debate seems to
mm,
have completely lost in America now. Um, I'm I'm not a fan of Biden, but you know I would vote for him in you know in a heartbeat to get rid of Donald Trump. I think that we really are in very, very dangerous times now. And I dread to think what happens if Donald Trump gets in. You know, I mean, I don't want to sound completely disparaging here, but you know, what good can come from you know a narcissist getting in again? You know, I mean, it's really quite remarkable times that we're actually seeing this.
Mm.
I'm borderline speechless about it. I'm
Hmm.
honest. You
Well,
know,
we.
I am going to just to say one thing though, that my kind of Louisiana friend, because I interviewed her a few times after Trump just got in, and one of the things that she kept coming back to was, after Donald Trump came in, it was the first time in history that the Ku Klux Klan went unrobed.
Mm,
And that shows you, I think, very symbolically, but also very practically, what the political
mm.
shift to the right that's actually occurred in America, and I find that quite terrifying, actually.
Yeah. Well, we will obviously have preliminary results to report tomorrow. We won't know, obviously, for sure what the final results are for some weeks, but we will obviously update you tomorrow. But we go on with our next story now, and back to Brexit. And the SNP has said that Boris Johnson is recklessly piling crisis on crisis after the Institute for Government warned the UK will struggle to deal with ending the Brexit transition period in the middle of a global pandemic. In a new report today, the IFG warned of inevitable disruption from the Tory government's preferred outcome and said the decision to end the transition period in December, despite the devastating effects of the coronavirus crisis, was a high-risk bet, made riskier still with every week that passes without clarity on the outcome of the negotiations, and in which the resurgence of coronavirus demands ever greater government and public attention. Among its key concerns, the IFG warned business readiness is the biggest problem for the end of 2020, with the COVID crisis leaving many firms less prepared than last year. While poor trader readiness and EU checks from January mean disruption is inevitable, and that fully implementing the Northern Ireland Protocol by January will be almost impossible. It comes after the National Institute for Economic and Social Research warned yesterday that the end of the Brexit transition period and the prospect of a no-deal Brexit represent significant threats to the UK's economic recovery, and said Brexit on top of COVID-19 is likely to broaden the shock to growth and employment in the first quarter of 2021, weakening the UK's recovery compared with other countries and reducing productivity in the long run. So Siobhan, I think we'll come to you first here. And I mean, a lot of what the Institute for Government is saying there is what a lot of Brexit skeptics or Brexit opponents have been saying for months, is that during the pandemic is just not the right time for this. And whatever happens now, it may well be too late for some businesses to manage the transition properly at all. How are you feeling about where we are with the Brexit negotiations just now?
I think this was inevitable, wasn't it? I mean, I think that, we were, it was kind of considered that, no, that's, you're being over dramatic, no deal, etc., etc. But this is probably where it was always going to land. I think, picking up on something that Roger said earlier on about this, constant conflict, lack of plan that government has, and do you know what? Genuinely sheer incompetence. I think it's just piling on, and it's just chaos after chaos after chaos. There's no coherence to anything that the UK seems to do anymore. To me, Brexit's always been vision over anything else. With no planning, no structure, no organisation. It's absolutely unbelievable that a genuine, credible government can actually even contemplate something like this in the middle of a global pandemic. Never have we needed international cooperation more. And we are literally in the middle of a global pandemic. I mean, this is huge. This is unbelievably huge. We don't know where this is going to land. We're in the middle of absolute rupture, aren't we? We don't know where this country or where this nation's going to land anywhere soon over the next 6 months, a year. And Brexit just makes all that uncertainty so much more, doubles it, triples it, quadruples it. We have no way. We're in some kind of weird vortex now, and there's no really good path. Brexit plus COVID is just, I mean, I know that you were talking about the kind of the EHRC's talking about, you know, it'll slump kind of economic growth for the first quarter, but I think the impact of this is going to be generational. You know, these are real, genuine shocks to the community, to the economy, to our society. It's going to take a long, long time to recover from this. It feels like we're moving into being very war weary now. You know, this is that level of chaos, that level of disruption, that level of uncertainty, that level of just being beaten constantly since the Brexit vote happened. It's quite remarkable that we're living through these times, to be perfectly honest. And it comes down to, I think, a combination of it's an empire in crisis, isn't it? It's an empire in crisis that doesn't know how to stop the destruction of its own self. And we can see that playing out quite clearly, I think, by their complete inability to actually find any solid plans forward. Don't know what they're going to do if Trump doesn't get in, because, you know, there seems to be quite a lot, you know, riding on a Trump deal, which is not good. But at least it was a partial plan, I suppose.
Well, of course, if Joe Biden wins, he has said that the threat to the Northern Ireland Protocol from the Internal Market Bill is something that would prevent a US trade deal, Roger. And we have heard today the European Commission is escalating the dispute over that. The EU sent a formal letter of notice to the UK government at the start of October over that, and they are now escalating that, which I believe the next step in a legal dispute is a reasoned opinion from the European courts. What do you see as the outcome of that process, Roger? Do you think that that is something that is going to push the UK government to alter the offending parts of the Internal Market Bill, or do you see this as a kind of symbol of a wider rupture between the EU and the UK government in terms of these negotiations?
Well, let me put it this way. Even if the EU was successful, and even if the EU are pushed into changing some of the legislation so that they're not breaking international law, it won't fix the problem. The problem here is, of course, you're right, Kenny, and Siobhan's right. This is one crisis on top of another. But the difference between the two forms of crisis is it wasn't the government that invented the virus, but it is the government that's invented this Brexit problem. And so this is of the UK government's own making, this whole approach that they have taken. So that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, I do think this is something that is going to alter significantly the business sector, the economy generally in the UK for a long time. And that I agree entirely with Siobhan. Many companies are completely unprepared. And in the past, when people were faced with big problems of a business, you would be able to turn to different forms of advisors. You might turn to your chartered accountant. You might turn to a bank. You might turn to a local parliamentary representative to find out what's going on in a legal sense, etc. There is nobody to turn to for business just now because nobody knows exactly what is going to happen. So businesses are being left, one, to cope with a pandemic that is proving enormously difficult to cope with. And on top of that, having this huge change going to take place without any coherence as to how they prepare, even if they had the resources to prepare. And so this is not looking good at all in terms of the UK economy, had effect in the Scottish economy. We know we've already lost a lot of businesses. My expectation is that we're going to lose a lot more businesses over the course of the next 6 months, in part because of the pandemic, but also because of what's happening Brexit-wise.
Well, we will obviously keep an eye on that story. November 17th is said to be the deadline by which a deal has to be agreed in order to give all the European Parliament's time to ratify that deal before the end of December. So we will obviously keep an eye on that. But back in Scotland now, and the new Scottish Child Payment, which is unique to Scotland, is to open early for applications from Monday the 9th of November. Social Security Scotland will be taking applications ahead of its introduction on Monday the 15th of February of this year to help manage the expected demand. 15th of February next year to help manage the expected demand. The new benefit, which will give eligible families on low incomes with children under 16 an extra £10 per week for each child, is planned to be fully rolled out to children under 16 by the end of 2022, subject to data on qualifying benefits being received from the DWP. Ministers have prioritised the early introduction for families with a child under 6, and despite the impact and disruption of COVID-19, are able to start payments from early 2021. Scotland is the only part of the UK where this additional payment for families with young children will be available. The payment could support up to 194,000 children this financial year, and the payment will be made every 4 weeks. The Scottish Government committed to introduce this new payment in June of 2019 as part of the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan. So, Siobhan, I think a lot of people, anti-poverty campaigners especially, have welcomed this move. Is this good news for you?
It's nice to end on a positive note, isn't it? Yeah, I mean the charity sector calls it a game changer, and I think that actually that's what it is. It doesn't seem like a lot of money, but you know what? It is. For poverty-stricken families, that is a lot of money, and that can make a big difference. You've got 3 kids, say that's 30 quid a week, 120 quid a month. That's a lot of money to, when you don't have much. So yeah, it can make a huge difference, and I think that it shows you. I think for me, it shows the direction that Scotland wants to move in, doesn't it? And I think that it shows where priorities are beginning to lie. And I think if you connect this with COVID as well, that the focus was schools, the focus was protecting children. Actually, that's one of the priorities that the Scottish Government has given over COVID, and I think that sentiment is there within the Scottish Child Payment as well. It's not just a sentiment, it's real practical assistance, which is vitally important. I mean, I'm from Dundee. Dundee has a long history of poverty from the Jute Mills onwards. It is insidious. Poverty is intergenerational. Kids growing up in poor conditions are cognitively kind of slower. They will less likely get a job. They're more likely to have poor health. A lot less likely to get good qualifications. So for the impacts of poverty on children are absolutely insidious. They're strong, they're intergenerational, and it's very difficult to remove once kids grow into poverty. So yeah, absolutely, I think it's a great thing. I'm genuinely proud that we can do something that has an actual genuine a significant impact, positive impact on kids, and from in a place like Dundee, that's going to make a big difference for a lot of families. I run a kind of emergency food programme. We set that up at the beginning of lockdown, and because we knew that poverty was going to kind of just skyrocket through the roof, and we knew that actually poor people were going to be subject to more COVID, and we know that poorer people were more likely to die during COVID, and because of the restraints that was imposed upon them. And one of the factors for me setting that up, or with my friends, was basically, well, how do you isolate if you're desperate for food? And that's the reality that we've got now. COVID will exacerbate that, and I think it's never been more timely for this child payment to come in, especially given the impact that COVID might have in increasing our poverty. So yeah, it's a big thing, and game changer is the word that's been thrown about, and I think it can certainly be a game changer. And that's not just the Scottish Government saying that, that's not the SNP saying that, that's the charity sector saying that. So it is a genuine kind of good impact. So yeah, great news.
And Roger, on a slightly wider note, how do you feel the administration of the Social Security Scotland as an organisation has gone? I mean, it's come in for some criticisms, but now that we are starting to see some of its work actually enacted, most of it's been quite positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've got to remember is it wasn't just setting up a system effectively from scratch to suit Scotland. But if we take the example of the child payment you've just been talking about, it's setting up a new system, but also implementing new policies at the same time. So given those circumstances, and given that it's been done at a time of a pandemic and all the chaos that ensues, I think it has gone, to be honest, more smoothly than I thought it would, given all these different challenges. And, you know, if you allow me to pick up on something that Siobhan said in that positive note, I know that when the policy was being created by the government, it was without any knowledge that a pandemic was going to hit us. But aren't we happy, particularly for the poorest in society, that that forward-thinking approach was taken way back in 2019, so that it helps us, it helps the poorest in society as they continue to toil under the pressure of this pandemic. So surely we can all say good on the Scottish Government for this.
Well, we come now to our final story of the day, and I think for Siobhan, this might be an even happier end to the show. The latest annual report from the Scottish Social Attitudes Survey has found record high support in favour of independence, with a sharp increase in support from EU Remain voters. Conducted between August 2019 and March 2020, the survey also found 57% of those who voted Remain in the EU referendum now back independence for Scotland, compared to 44% in 2016. It was also found that 54% of voters asked believed that Scotland's voice in the world will be stronger as an independent country, and 62% think an independent Scotland would have more pride in itself. Commenting on the findings, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, "Scotland's voice has been ignored by Westminster from day one of the disastrous Tory Brexit process. We voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, yet Tory governments that we didn't vote for, led by the likes of Boris Johnson, are dragging us out of Europe against our will. Record numbers of voters now support independence because it's clearer than ever that this is not a partnership of equals. The UK government can't be trusted to act in Scotland's best interests." So, as I said, Siobhan, this is probably really good news for you to hear.
Do you know what? I am such a nerd, and I have pored over the social attitude survey. If it could be turned into a BBC drama, I swear to God I would do it, because it's great news. I think it presents a really positive image of Scottish society and culture. There's I mean, some of the findings that the social attitudes, and this was before COVID as well, so, and I think it might have kind of increased by then. The trust in the Scottish government was very high. You know, we thought overwhelmingly that the Scottish government listened to us, that it made fair decisions, it gave us a better voice, it gave us a stronger voice. And on the other end of the scale, trust in the UK government was at an all-time low. And that was one of the points in the report that was made quite strongly, that, I mean, it was an all-time low in terms of trust in the Scottish government. What I thought was particularly good, and I think and I think again it shows us where the ideological separation is now going between Scotland and the UK, is that there's most people in Scotland wanted to have a better health, education service, and they were willing to pay extra tax for that. 54%. People thought that. Only 4% that were questioned wanted to reduce those services and have reduced taxes. So it's very, very at odds with a kind of very quite right-wing conservative policy that seems to be working. I think what was also quite interesting in it as well is that more people wanted a redistribution of wealth. And so there's a couple of things there that moves back into that post-45 settlement that the UK seems to be moving away from. We want a fairer society, we want a robust and we want a strong welfare structure as well. In addition to that, of course, we have very strong trust that the Scottish government will bring that bring that in on our behalf. I've always been pretty clear. I think since the general election, I think that Scotland has pretty much decided that the UK is a thing of the past for us. And I think that perhaps the Scottish Attitude Survey maybe reflects that sentiment. I do think that the shift is there, and it's very apparent in the Social Attitude Survey. One more interesting thing I thought was that there was quite a sophisticated understanding in that, in terms of what's devolved and what's not. And what you saw was that there was, over the last couple of years, there was a tendency for more people in Scotland to think that the NHS standards were slipping. But when that was dug into a little bit deeper in terms of the questions, what it was revealing is that actually people did see the standards as slipping, but actually they blamed the UK government and not the Scottish government for that, because they saw it as a part of an austerity agenda, So there's an element there that, the Scottish government get a lot of the credit for a lot of the good things that have happened, and the UK government are getting a lot of the blame for a lot of the bad things that's happened. I would agree with that, but rightly or wrongly, that's certainly what the Scottish people are kind of moving towards now. So yeah, great news. Honestly, it was inspirational reading. That's coming from a total nerd, but absolutely inspirational reading, and I would genuinely recommend reading it. I've actually written an article on it, set for publication, just because it's a wonderful snapshot of where Scotland's moving and what Scotland's thinking now.
Yeah. Well, Roger, I just wanted to bring up one figure that jumped out to me. That's 62% who think an independent Scotland would have more pride in itself. I mean, that's 62%, quite significantly higher than the number supporting independence. What story do you think that tells us?
Well, of course, it might be that what it's telling us is that there are some people who, because of their attitudes, might be not too difficult to shift towards supporting independence. So from that point of view, I would treat that as a very positive thing, that there are those more positive future attitudes towards Scotland and what will make Scotland proud. But perhaps people are still worried, a bit reticent, haven't quite made the shift towards saying I support independence. So I would take it as a positive opportunity for us, not as something to be worried about. The thing that I would say about the attitude survey, and of course they've been running for many years, is that I pay more attention to them than I do to opinion polls. They're much more rigorous in the research. There's much more a qualitative as well as a quantitative dimension to it. And therefore, for me, it's much more persuasive about what's happening in society. So that, for example, a snapshot individual opinion polls, you don't really get a sense of what are the changing feelings of people, what are the changing ways in which they're understanding their society. You do get that much more in terms of the social attitude survey. So I think this provides us with a great deal more confidence than I would have taken from mere opinion polls in the last year or so. I think this suggests that there are deep-seated changes taking place within the attitudes of the Scottish people that are to the advantage of those of us that want to see an independent Scotland.
Well, that seems like a perfect place for us to finish. Just before we do go, though, Siobhan, you said you'd written an article. Do you want to let people know where they can find that?
Well, I've submitted it to Bella Caledonia.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
We'll keep an eye on Bella over the next couple of days, then hopefully it'll pop up. But that is pretty much all we have time for tonight. So I would like to thank very much Roger Mullen and Siobhan Tolland for joining us. It's been a pleasure to hear from both of you. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well, because there would be no point in making the shows if you weren't here. We do have to ask you, if you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is what helps us keep going here at Broadcasting Scotland. Everything that we do, from keeping the lights on to running our outside broadcast van to everything else, all comes out of that budget. So if you're able to support us, please do. If you're not, then don't worry. The shows are always free to view online. That's never going to change. But you can still do us a huge favour by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, by liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and then sharing the shows around with people. Word of mouth is by far the best way to spread the word about Broadcasting Scotland, to let people know what we do. So do please tell people that you know why you support Broadcasting Scotland, and hopefully they will join us sometime soon. And finally, as well, we are looking at an election next year and potentially an independence referendum, as well as all the news that we have to cover now. So we are always looking for new volunteers as well. If you're interested in getting involved in broadcasting, whether it is in front of or behind the camera, and this is wherever you are in Scotland, you do not have to be based in Glasgow to be involved. Although we would love a couple of extra hands in Glasgow. But wherever you are in the country, we would love to hear from you. So do please get in touch with us. But that is absolutely all we have time for tonight. Gordon, no, I'm sorry. I will be back tomorrow at 7 again. But until then, thank you once again to Roger Mullen and Siobhan Tolland. Thank you for joining us, and have a great evening. Good night.